Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and today what I want to do is talk about how to deploy a Django application to render.com. Just because I know a lot of people used to deploy their Django apps to Heroku, but then Heroku got rid of their free tier, so I thought I would talk about how to deploy to render. My old videos about how to deploy to Heroku still generally apply, but again, Heroku is no longer free. So let's open up VS Code. Let me close this tab. So just exit this Docker container. Let me show I exit so I don't have a hang-in Docker container as I switch applications. So open folder and let's go to development, education, teaching, videos, video singles. Okay, and then we'll just call this Django. Okay, so first this is actually like create a Django app. This should probably take me like 3 to 5 minutes. And so if you don't care about how I set this up, although again, there are probably little nuances that you do want to catch while I do this. Okay, so essentially the steps would be, tale as old as time. Okay, I create a terminal. I'm going to create a virtual environment. Okay, so Python -m vnv. That'll create our virtual environment. Then I'm going to activate our virtual environment as soon as that's done. So it's going to be source./vnv/bin/activate, and that's going to run the activate script, which turns on our virtual environment. So now I have a nice isolated environment for my Python development. And then I'm going to install the libraries that I'm going to want to install, which is going to be pip install. I'm going to need to install Django because it's our backend framework. I'm going to want to install Psycho. Assuming you want to use a Postgres database, then you would download the appropriate or any database, you want to use the appropriate drivers. I'm going to be talking about using a Postgres database, so theoretically you would want to install Psycho PG2. Okay, but sometimes you have problems like building Psycho PG2, so there's also a Psycho PG2 binary library, although I'm pretty sure I'm spelling Psycho wrong. Okay, I still think that's wrong. I think it's like, let's just look it up because it's early on a Saturday morning and I haven't fully woken up yet. Psycho PG2 binary. Okay, and the benefit of downloading this binary version 1 is you don't have to worry about whether your particular computers has the appropriate C and C++ libraries installed, which, you know, for especially if you're a new developer, you probably may not have those. Like, because on Mac, you'd have to make sure you have Xcode installed. If you're on Linux, you have to install certain libraries. On Windows, they may or may not be there. And again, you have to install certain libraries if not. This just kind of gets rid of having to worry about that. So let me just copy and paste that there. So that's what Psycho PG binary is going to be about. You could also just do Psycho PG2 if you feel comfortable that you do have those libraries. Okay, we're going to want G unicorn or unicorn, however you want to pronounce it. This is going to be what allows us to run our web application in production. So this could also be used with other frameworks like Flask and Fast API. Although Fast API usually use Uvicorn, but the idea is that it just runs your web app, your Python web app, in a production style. Okay, G unicorn. Then we're also going to want DJ database URL. This is going to allow us to connect to our database via a database URL. Okay, and I think that is all I need at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to let that just get all installed. Wonderful. Cool. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Django application. So I'm going to say Django admin start project. Okay, start project. We'll call it deploy to render. Okay, yeah. I don't think I can do these dashes. Deploy to render. There we go. So now we have a project. Now I'm going to cd into that project. Okay, and first thing I am going to do is just open this up. And let's set a few things up. Well, first, let's just get the server, a basic route running. So I want to head over to, well, let's create an app. So Django admin start app. So again, an app's like a sub chunk of your project. Start app first. We'll just call it first. It doesn't matter. Okay, first. So now that I've created this app, I gotta register this app with settings. So I'm just gonna quickly check this apps file here. First config. I just needed to check that on. So I'm gonna head over to settings.py and wire the application right here under installed apps. So I just have to be like um first.apps.first config. That should, because again, basically it's starting with this folder. Then in that folder we have a file called apps, and inside that file there's a class called first config, and that's what that needs to point to. Okay. Next we'll create like a view function. Okay, and let me just create a quick template. So new file, templates. Oh, that's a file. I want to create a folder. New folder called templates. And in there we'll put like a new file, index.html, which is just going to say h1 hello world. We just want to see that it works. Okay, and then I'm going to head over back to views. And then what we're going to do is create a function, def, okay, main, we'll call it main route. And again, it should just take the request object. Okay, and then we are just going to render. Okay, we're going to pass in the request object, and then we pass in the name of the template, which is just index.html. Okay, and it'll should just render that. Okay, so that's what that function does. Now I just need to connect that function to a URL. So I head over to my urls.py, and here are our different routes. So I'm going to make a path, and the path will just be the main path. And then basically what we're going to want to do is do first dot, well, actually, let me import that first. So from first dot views import main route. Okay, and then we're just going to pass that main route function to that URL. And that's it. Okay, so now that should work. So let's just run our app. So Python Python manage.py run server. That's going to run our server. Okay, so our server is running. So now I should be able to go to localhost 8000. Oh, let's see here. Didn't return an HTTP response object. It returned none instead. Oh, did I forget the word return? I think I did. Oh, you can tell it's early in the morning. Yep, I didn't write the word return. There we go. Okay, so that's going to refresh. Let's try that again. And there we go. Okay, so that works. Our server works. Wonderful. Okay. Now let's deploy it. Okay, so a couple pieces we want to get into place to deploy this. Okay, so in settings.py, okay, we're going to want to import OS because we're going to need to get access to environmental variables. That's again a built-in Python library, so it's not something we had to install. Import DJ database URL, which we installed. Again, that's going to allow us to basically use the database URL environmental variable to define our database connection. So first things first, you don't want to be committing your secret key. So we want that to come from an environmental variable. So we're going to just sit there and say os.environ.get, and then we're going to say, hey, it comes from a variable called secret key. And if that variable is not present, then what we'll do is we will use this jumble of numbers and letters. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so if we don't define the variable, at least it'll have a fallback. Okay, then we have this debug true variable. Okay, you want debug true, okay, to be false when you're running in production. So for render, okay, and actually it's in the documentation. So render deploy Django. And basically what you want to do there And we just go find that particular line. Where is it in the settings of pi? Install that. That's all fine and good. Skip to the point. Here we go. Debug. We want to do this. So basically, what this is going to be doing is it's saying if there is a variable in the environment, which is not going to be in your local environment unless you create it. So, but this environmental variable will exist in your app's environment when it's deployed on render, because again, the environment is where your app is running. So your local environment, and then there's your production environment when you deploy it to the world. So if this variable exists, then basically debug will only be true if it's not. Okay, so since I got this right here, I'll just copy that. Copy. Okay, so it's just basically saying, hey, if this variable doesn't exist in the environment, then debug is true. So you're going to get the debug mode. Okay, then allowed host, we have to do something else kind of funky here. Let me just go back to that piece. Okay, nope, that's the thing that's supposed to have been earlier. Oh, well, here's a DJ database URL setup, so I must just grab that while we're here. Okay, let's make sure I grab the whole thing here. Oh, we kind of formatted it funny there. Okay. And then we go through the database section, and then we just paste this right over that. Actually, I think I copied and pasted this piece right here. Nope. Okay, so basically what this is saying, and let me just see here. It looks like this is not formatted right. So format default config. That is technically closed, but maybe I just have to hit enter here. Okay, I'm going to get the one from the actual DJ database. DJ database URL documentation, because that one's a little bit nicer. There we go. Okay, that's what I want. Okay, so we put this in there. And essentially what this is saying is that your default database, which is the database that it's just naturally going to connect to, barring any kind of other flags, is going to be whatever database is defined in your database URL environmental variables. So you have to just make sure you define that when you want to connect to your database. Okay. Right now, our application isn't doing anything with our database, so it should be fine. But again, you're going to want to make sure that this variable is defined. So if you want to define it locally, the way you would define it locally so that way you can try out your database locally is you would just define the database right here in your terminal, export database URL equals, and then you would put whatever the URL for the database is here. Okay, again, just keep in mind that when you do that, it only defines that variable for that terminal for this run. So when you create a new terminal, that variable has been cleared out. You'll have to redefine it again. Okay, it's kind of like your virtual environment. If you close your terminal, open a new one, you'd have to reactivate your virtual environment. You don't have to create a new one. You would just have to activate it. Okay, just some nuances for local testing. Okay, but yeah, that's pretty much all we need there. Okay, let me go find that section about the allowed host. Because basically what this does is going to allow, if you're building an API, this is what's going to allow other websites to be able to access, which is actually not really particularly important for us right now because we're not building an API. We just have that one HTML page, but let's still see what that would look like. Okay, I think it's earlier. Here we go, allowed host. So what we would want to do is copy this line right here. From the documentation, and we'll walk through it. We put that right below. Okay, and so what this is doing, okay, this should all be one line. If, why does it look like, oh, I see what's happening. Okay, so this should be there. There we go. Expected else. Why does it expect else? If enter hostname. Okay. I see. Okay, so I got a little confused there. So this goes on the next line. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so basically what's happening here is first we're taking this variable render external hostname, and basically again there's going to be a variable that render is going to create in the environment. So again, this is just something that render is providing you when you deploy to their servers, called render external hostname. And essentially what you're doing is you're getting that variable and storing it in here. This is checking, hey, does this variable actually have a value? If this variable does not have a value, then it does nothing. But if it does, then it's going to append the value of that variable, which is the host that we would want in this list, and it just appends it. Okay, so that's what that's doing. So that way, when the app is deployed on render, you know, it's accessible. Okay, cool. Now, if we wanted to do cores, okay, actually we would need to install another library. Okay, so actually let me go look that up real quick. Django cores. Okay, Django's cores headers, here we are. Okay, so we would also go and install this. So let me do that as well. So I shut off the server. Pip install Django cores headers. Why would you want cores headers? Again, your front end, if you're building an API, would not be able to communicate with your server if you don't have the Django cores headers. Okay, and so to set that up, all you have to do is add this installed app to your installed apps. Okay, so I head over to my installed apps. Okay, cores headers. And then I am going to make sure I add this middleware. So all I really want is this line here. This is just to kind of show you where you need to put it. So I need to put it above the common middleware. So see, that's where that is. And then I'm just going to put that right there. Okay, awesome. Okay, so that's almost taken care of. Then you have to set up like who do you want to have access to your website. Okay, I'm just going to allow everybody. So you can see there's different options. So you can read through the documentation to see like, hey, I only want to allow these URLs to make requests to my server. I'm going to keep life simple, and I'm going to use this cores allow all origins. Okay, so we just copy that. I just go over here, and literally just like anywhere, I can just put in like equals true. Okay, and then that's going to set that variable to true, and it just means all are allowed. Okay, so that's easy enough. Okay, and I think that for the most part sets up our settings.py. I don't see anything else I need to really edit to just deploy. Okay, so now let's just kind of think through the next piece. There's a few things we're going to want to put in here. Okay, and again, this is going to go inside the same folder with the manage.py. So in the same folder as the manage.py, okay, I'm going to create a new file, and we can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to call it startup.shell or sh. Okay, you can call it setup, you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Or we can call it build. Let's call it build.sh. Okay, it doesn't really matter what it's called. Okay, but the point of this script is to do anything you need to get your app sort of built out from the get-go. So theoretically, you know, your production database may not be the same as your local database. And also you need to make sure you install your dependencies, because just because you have your virtual environment locally doesn't necessarily mean all those dependencies are installed in your production environment on render. Okay, but we need to make sure we have a list of those dependencies. Okay, so again, make sure that your terminal is in the same folder as the manage.py. So I can do an ls and see, hey, look, my terminal is currently in the same folder as the manage.py. And what I want to do is run this command, pip freeze. What that does is freeze the list of libraries you've installed so far in the active environment. So that virtual environment that we've activated in this terminal. And then I want to take that list and I want to pipe them into a file. Again, you can call this file whatever you want. I'm lazy, so I'm going to type less. I'm going to just say deps.txt. Okay. Cool. So see, that creates this file called deps.txt. Again, the name doesn't matter. It's not like Heroku and sometimes other environments where you have to call it requirements.txt because that's what it expects. In this case, we are building the script of how all these steps are going to play out, so we can call it whatever we want. So now what I want to do is, so here in this build script, I need to give instructions to render what to do when it deploys my app. So I need to say, hey, deploy. I need you to deploy. I mean, first I need you to install dependencies. That'd be nice. So we're going to do pip install -r. That's so that way you can install it from a file, and then you put the name of the file, build.sh, and it's expecting that's going to be in the same folder, and the folder theoretically that it will install from is this main deployed to render folder. Again, that's where your manage.py is. because that's going to be the root of our repository if we set this up right. Okay, then the second thing you're going to want to do is you want to run your migrations in case there is any. Run migrations. You don't run make migrations because theoretically you've already made your migrations when you've been testing this out locally. So those migrations exist. They just need to be run against your production database in case that database is different than your local development database. So it would just be like python manage.py migrate. Okay, and technically if you run those two things, the environment should be set up. It should have all the dependencies that you need. Your database should be migrated, assuming that your environmental variables are defined, and you're all good to go. Okay, so this sets up your environment. Now this file needs to be executable. So to make it executable, we just use the chmod command. Might be different on Windows. Okay, and then you're going to say plus x, which means you're going to add the ability for it to be executed. Okay, plus x, and then the file you want to add that to is build.sh. Okay, so you're adding execution permissions to this file. Okay, done. If you're not sure that it worked, you can do an ls-la, so that way you can see all the permissions, and then we'll look for that file, build.sh, and see, we can see that it's executable. See, if you see those X's. That's because the R's are read, the W's are write. So read, write, execute. Read, write, execute. Okay. So basically, all these different groups, and I always forget, I think it's like root, the owner of the file, and then like other users. So the root user has the ability to read, write, execute. The owner of the file has the ability to read, write, execute, and other users have the ability to read and execute but not write. Okay, that's kind of how that reads. Okay, cool. So that is good. That is good. So now what we need to do is create a Git repository. Again, make sure you're in the folder with the manage.py. That's where you want to create your Git repository. Don't make it in the parent folder. You want it here in this folder. So your terminal will see my folder. My terminal is in this folder. Okay, so I'm going to do git init. That's going to create the Git repository. Then I'm going to add everything to the repository. Okay, and then I'm going to do a git commit -m first commit, and now I need to push this up to GitHub. Okay, so I'm going to head over to github.com. We'll create a new repository. We'll call this like deploy Django to render. Okay, so that way you can find it in my profile. If you want to look at it, create repository. And then what we want to do is copy this line over here because we want to add this repository as a place we can push our code to. So I'm going to go run that over here. And if that worked out right, what I should be able to do is do git remote -v, and I should see that URL listed. Good, I see it. We're connected. So now I just have to do a git push. So git push origin main. And again, your branch may not necessarily be the main branch. So you can tell what branch you're on. Either your prompt may show you depending on your terminal. And also in VS Code, right down here, it tells you what branch you're currently working from if the folder you're in is a repository. Okay, so that's helpful. Okay. Whew. Okay. So git push origin main. That pushes the code. I can refresh this. And now I see that the code's been pushed. And this is how it should look like. Notice that my manage.py is at the top level. Okay. So this root of the repo, or this top level, needs to be where the manage.py is. So if I see just a folder and the manage.py is in the folder, redo it. Okay. Your repo needs to be starting from here. Okay. And then I'm going to head over to render. Let's get back over the render and log in. Okay. And I'm going to log in with my GitHub. Now, you're going to want a database URL. So I'm going to head over to, you can just use something like a bit.io for a free Postgres database. Okay, so I'm going to sign in with my GitHub. Okay, and I'm going to, I have 3 databases. So I'm going to just delete this one right here. Well, I'll delete this one here right afterwards anyways. So what I would do is you'd click here on, actually, now I want a fresh database. So you can see the whole process. So I'm going to delete this database. You only get 3 databases for free. So I'm going to type that into here to delete it. Okay, and then I'm going to create a new database. So here I click on new DB, and then we'll just call this again temp 022523. Okay, private, that's fine. Create database. Again, this is a free tier. And then you click here on connect, and then you're going to copy this URL because we're going to need it in a second. Okay, so go back to render. I'm going to say, hey, I want to add a new web service. Again, this is not a static site. So if you were deploying like React, Vue, something like that, you would do a static site. But since we're deploying a backend web service, you want to deploy a new web service. Okay, it's going to show you your repositories here that you want to connect to on GitHub. Just takes a second for all of them to load. There it goes. Okay, so there's my repository. I want to connect it. Give this just a random name, so just say deploy to render. You can kind of leave this alone. Branch, that's fine. The root directory, that's fine. Runtime Python 3, that's fine. Okay, now the build command, this we want to change. So the build command, okay, should be running our build file. So we're just going to say dot slash, what did we call it? Build dot, I think? Build. Okay, so basically it would be just dot slash build dot. So it's basically what it's going to do is going to run that command before anything, before it does everything else. Okay, so that's what we're going to want to do. Then here in the start command, you're going to want to do gunicorn. And then this next part should be the name of your app. So the name of our app is deploy to render. Okay, so it's whatever this folder, these folders are called. Okay, deploy to render.wsgi. Okay, so that's what that command should be. Okay, and then you want to click here on advanced. We want to set up some environmental variables. So it's 3 variables we need. We need our database URL. So we just copy over database URL. And the value of that should be what we just copied over from bit.io. Then we're going to add another environmental variable, secret key. And this could literally be anything. So you can just, actually there's like a generate button to generate a random thing. So if you click right here, see it'll generate a random value for you. And then add here, the last one is going to be Python version. This should be whatever Python version you've been working locally, so that way make sure it can download the right dependencies. So what I can do over here, I do Python -- version, and I can see, Python, I spelled version wrong. Version, and I see I'm using 3.10. So then I'll go back over here and just type in 3.10.0. Okay, and then that's good. Okay, and I don't think there's anything else I really need to change in here. Okay, so then we click create web service. And then this is going to take a while to deploy because it's going to be building our app and setting everything up. Okay, so I'm going to pause this for a second while it does all that. Now you may get like build errors like this. So you see here I get this error that says couldn't import Django. So when I see that, that makes me concerned whether Django was installed. Okay, so generally I'm going to ask, like, the installation should have happened from running the build-dash. But you see here, we see a problem. It says, hey, pip install, invalid requirement, pip install, you're using pip version 23 of her. So it didn't install, so we have to figure out why that didn't work. Okay, so let me go examine my build script. Pip install -r build. And it does say we're using pip. So let's see, you are using pip version. However, 23.01 is available. So why wouldn't pip install? Invalid requirement. Pip install -r build -. Oh, I see what I did. What happened is this is recursive. I meant this is supposed to be deps.txt. Okay, it's supposed to be the text file with the list of my dependencies. So that's why that failed. So what I need to do is go over here and just fix this, deps.txt. Okay, or every time you get an error, you want to ask yourself, like, okay, what did I expect to happen? What is supposed to make that happen? And then go check those things. So like, okay, well, this is what's supposed to run pip. So I examined that and I realized I made a mistake and I fixed it. So now what I got to do is I got to push up the code. So I have a command that kind of I have a custom command that I made that shortcuts all this for me, so I just can just do update origin main. Okay, so that saves me some time there. And what's going to happen is you'll notice if you click on events, a new deployment starts now that I've pushed up. Basically, again, you have what's called continuous deployment. So anytime you push to GitHub, it's going to trigger a new deployment. Okay, if I change any of my environmental variables, it'll trigger a new deployment. While it does that, I might as well just check here, make sure that my environmental variables are defined, which they are, so that's good. Okay, otherwise, again, I also check my settings, make sure that my build command is what I expect it to be. That's what I want my build command to be. That's what I want my start command to be. So everything is looking pretty good now. I think we fixed what we need to fix, so we'll let it click here so I can watch the deploy happen, and we'll see how it goes this time. Okay, so now I got a different error, and again, always the error is always going to be at the very bottom of the output, so you always want to make sure that you're reading the output. A lot of people just sit there, they see an error, and they just kind of freeze up. Take a moment and you read the output, because you'll see oftentimes it tells you exactly what you need to know. So it's saying core's allowed origins should be a sequence of strings, which makes sense, because technically it's allowed origins, meaning a list of origins. So I grabbed the wrong property. So going back to Django's cores, what I wanted to do was cores allow all origins. My bad. And I can see that kind of described over here. Allow all origins is the one that's a boolean. So I go back to my settings.py in this folder here, settings.py, and I gotta just fix that right here. And this should be that. Cores allow all origins. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to again push my code up. So this command here is the equivalent of me doing a git add, a git commit, and then a git push. So you will have to do those 3 commands. Okay, I just have a nice little bash function that kind of speeds that whole process up. Okay, and then that's going to update my code. So now if I go back to render and I click on events, a new deployment should have started. So then I'll click on deploy here, and we'll watch the process go. Okay, so it looks like we're just about at the end of this. So you can see like this is what it looks like when you're at the end and it's working. So you see here it says like build uploaded in 29 seconds, build successful. So yay. That means the build doesn't mean our app is working. Deploying, because again, now that means the build, the setup was successful. So render was able to deploy our app. But again, we might have forgotten to deploy, to define certain environmental variables that might cause runtime errors. So again, if you still have errors, so now I'm going to go to check out the app. I'll click here, and it works. So we're good. Our app is working. But if you still had other additional errors, things I would check is just to check your environmental variables. Number one mistake I see is people forget to define these. Okay, so just to kind of recap, you want to make sure your environmental variables are defined. You want to make sure that your build command runs your shell script, and that your start command uses gunicorn to run your WSGI file. Okay, and again, make sure that your build script basically installs your dependencies file, wherever you have whatever file you have your dependencies listed, using that pip install -r command. So with that, again, I'll link to the repo so you can kind of use it for comparison. But my name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Have a great day and enjoy. And also make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and all that good stuff. I'll see you all later.